it looks like South Africans are nowhere near finding out who's financing political parties. The political party funding bill has been lying idle for 6 months. The IEC says the unit that's meant to implement the legislation will only be operational from April. This means you're only likely to find out after voting in the May elections who is financing your political party of choice. Another hurdle is that President Cyril Ramaphosa is yet to sign the bill into law. For more on this, I'm joined in studio now by Professor Mia Swart. She's a research director at the Human Sciences Research Council. Thank you so much, Professor Swart, for joining us at this evening on Newsnight. Now, this has been an ongoing debate, right? And it's been an ongoing debacle about financing and about knowing who exactly is funding political parties. Although some individuals will say, why is it that we're so curious to know? Because it's an international fact that you don't necessarily have to declare who's financing which political party. For South Africa's context, why so important?
Well, we know that corruption has really been polluting our political landscape over the last years, right?
Yeah.
So there can be no more important item on our political agenda. It should be at the forefront of our minds. It should be, really something that we all are pushing for. And it is surprising that the public, isn't taking a stronger position on this. And, there's so much money around that has been stolen, that we know has been stolen now, post the latest revelations. And, there might be, or there probably is a strong connection between political party funding and some of this, stolen money.
So are we trying to avoid a situation now where we've got maybe state capture? Because we've seen, look, the state capture is actually going on in terms of the hearings, and startling revelations that are coming out about how far, back the actual debacle actually goes. So is that the reason why we should be advocating as the public for this bill to actually come into full effect, and we know, and there's more transparency in terms of political party funding? Yes,
well, that is one crucial reason for sure. I would say another reason would just be that it's a constitutional imperative that, there should be transparency, there's a right to vote, and the right to vote, for example, only makes sense if it's an informed vote. There's a right to access to information.
Yeah, and this is interesting because the article itself that I was reading was speaking about how the right to know, and when it comes to political party funding, parties find most of the funding from the private sector as opposed to the public sector. So a lot of the party funding comes from private sector. Will that then, given the fact that funding comes from the private sector, will that change the way I view a political party?
Of course it would. And I think that is part of the reason that many of our parties have opposed making disclosure of their funders for many years. And this is something I wanted to just say straight away, is that one reason it's important in South Africa now is that we've never regulated the private funding of political parties, unlike many countries in the world where this is, a completely accepted, part of the political life is to have disclosure of, I'm not saying the disclosure is always perfect, but it's not at all unusual to have this regulated. And in South Africa, there's just been a free-for-all for more than 20 years now. Yeah. And we know that this kind of funding always
for more than 20, and this again goes back to the, you know where I'm going to go with this, because free-for-all for more than 20 years, that's in the democratic dispensation of South Africa. But prior to the democracy of South Africa, right? So during 1948, 1949, etc., the disclosure of political party funding. So in other words, who funded the national party?
Right.
Were we that interested in knowing? And should we be having, Win would say that I don't know how many eyebrows were raised during the time of funding the national party compared to now funding some of the political parties that exist today.
Well, that's a very good question, right? And I think this has not been probed enough and would be really fascinating, especially, I would say, foreign funders. Because one of the most interesting aspects of the new bill is that foreign donations are prohibited. And, this was not the case in the past. So I'm sure the National Party was heavily funded by some foreign governments. But we also know that, we can only probe so much, sort of one thing at a time. And with the upcoming elections, I would say that, it's really important that the President signs this bill as a matter of urgency, even though it's probably too late, in terms of...
Because we're only going to know way after the elections, after the May elections, really.
Right, in terms of, everything that needs to be put in place to actually get the disclosure information, we will only know after May. But it will keep parties on their toes because, sooner or later we will know who funded.
But will it not decrease party funding? And let me And I'm playing devil's advocate here, so
Right.
allow me to.
No,
so when we're looking at the private funders, because private sector funds them, won't private funders look at this and go, if I'm going to be disclosed that Faith Mangope funded whichever political party 5 million rand into this, automatically I'm going to want to withdraw this funding because I do not have anonymity, so to say. Would that be the case?
Yes, that is, however, only the case if you donate more than 100,000 rands, which is not that much. I think that amount is a bit too low. While they say in the case of the smaller parties, it might be too high. But in general, I think it is a fairly low threshold. But if you're within that limit, you can remain anonymous. It's only if you donate more than that. But I think you are touching upon one of the gravest concerns with this entire issue, which is that the smaller parties, the opposition parties, are at a disadvantage, of course, because, they may not,
They might not want to fund.
Or, they may never be in the running for a government tender. This might certainly, these kinds of things will then not come to them. And we need a robust multi-party democracy as well. So there's sort of that interest that you have to weigh against openness, transparency, etc.
Well, we're definitely going to have this conversation, I'm sure, in just a short moment of time. As we know, 2019 is election year, and many interests and many eyes will be on what happens in terms of the political landscape of this country. And this is where the conversation starts. Should we be disclosing about funding, or should we not be disclosing? Professor Mia, thank you so much for joining us this evening on Newsnight.